It's great to be with you here as we continue another message this Sunday morning all about heaven. And this message entitled, Are Your Bags Packed? And the first thing that we need to know is I've got an hourglass, although I've got to say that this is really a half-hour glass. No one should preach longer than 30 minutes. I know I violated that a couple of times. But what I want to do is starting now. The time is leaking out of the top into the bottom. I can see the sand. I'm sure you can't see that from the cameras, but I can see that already forming there. That's really a lot to do with our message today. So I hope you'll remember this. And just you can kind of watch this. You got plenty of time. You want to go to the kitchen, turn the volume up, go to the kitchen, get a sandwich, or maybe this is time to get some breakfast cereal or put a waffle in the toaster, whatever you want to do. You got some time. But eventually, this will run out. We mark things on our calendars, special events that we need to make sure that we are there for. We're excited to be able to note that that is the day that we leave, like on vacation. Now, when I was growing up, when we would get ready to leave for Canada, that's typically what we did every August early. We would head to Canada, to the same place to fish and to hike around. It was always a lot of fun. And the night before we left, I know the routine. Mom and Dad would say, okay, get all your things, everything that you will need, packed in your bag. So we would begin to pack all our stuff. They would bring the pop-up camper, the top would pop up. They would bring that up and they would begin to load everything in it. The boat would go on top, upside down. The motor would go inside. So they would have this up, they're packing everything, and then right before we left, of course, there were always those moments, ooh, I forgot this, or I forgot that. And we would just kind of open the door of the camper and just throw a number of things inside. But I remember that night before, because we would leave about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning and we would still be asleep, and we would just grab our bags, they'd be taken to the car, loaded, boom, and we're gone. Off on vacation. But it would be different, wouldn't it? Can you imagine if the first day that school was out, that you told your children that, hey, we're going to be leaving on vacation. I want you to get your bags packed, get ready to go. We're going to be going. And you're going on like an excursion, like let's say out to the Redwood Forest or up to Canada, somewhere exotic and far away. And then your children would say, well, when do we leave? When do we leave? And you say, well, we don't know exactly when we're leaving, but we want you to be ready to leave. Could be any time. Could be tonight. It might be next summer, but just be ready. And our children would probably look at us like, we don't even understand what that means. That's a little bit about what Jesus is talking about in Matthew chapters 24 and 25. Now last week, and if you haven't watched last week, I hope that you'll go on and do that, because it kind of sets the stage for this second coming of Jesus when he arrives on our planet. And it's here that Jesus, in the midst of 24 and 25, that he begins to give us, at the beginning of 25, a parable about 10 bridesmaids. And he wants us to understand this idea of being ready. So he says to them, to everyone who is there, he says, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. And so right off the bat, we're in a wedding situation. And there are a lot of preparations in getting ready for a wedding. I know because my daughter is going to be married this coming spring. And Leanne and Hannah are just going through every kind of thing that you could possibly imagine about a wedding. Now, I have been a part of a lot of weddings because I'm a pastor. And I've been to a lot of receptions because I'm a pastor. But I did not know all the preparations that had to be planned for a wedding until now. And there are a lot. What will the food be like? Should we taste that? The cake, should we taste that? All of these tasting things. Well, I don't mind that. But anyways, there is a lot of preparation to get ready for a wedding. And back here, at this time, it would be customary for the groom to come over and arrive at the bride's house, where they would be married and then off to his place where they would live. And people would come and greet them for the next week. It was a very special time. Sometimes these weddings would take place at night. And the moment that the bridegroom is coming and his entourage to the bride's house and all the bridesmaids, of course, they're going to get up and get ready, and they would light their lamps and go out and line the road coming up to the house. It was a great celebration. The odd thing about this one is that right from the very beginning, Jesus tells us that 5 were foolish and 5 were wise. It says here in the next verse that the 5 who were foolish, which gives us an indication of why, didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps. They didn't have enough. The other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. Probably in some little clay pottery, they had extra oil. And so this whole thing comes down to oil. Now, it's a little difficult at this point because we're trying to figure out what is the oil. Is the oil faith? Is it works? Is it the Holy Spirit? And probably what we need to do is just set that aside for a while, that the oil probably most likely is like faith. But we'll just set that aside because that's not really the main point. They simply did not have enough of this oil. They weren't prepared like the 5 who were wise were prepared. Now, there is something that you have to note early on in this parable. I think this is really important. And that is that all were invited to the wedding. Everyone received the invitation, especially the bridesmaids. I mean, that was, that's all planned out ahead. We want you to be there. It's going to be great. It'll be awesome. We hope that you're there at the wedding. Yes. And you see, they responded. So all of them responded. They've RSVP'd back, to the people that are putting the wedding on, to both the bride and the groom. They've gotten back with them and said, yes, we'll be there. In fact, they are there. They're there, ready to go. They're dressed. They've got lamps. They're ready to go. They just didn't take along extra oil. Perhaps they didn't think it would take that amount of time. I can't help but think here of the parable of the 4 soil types. Jesus says there is this good seed. And the good seed is scattered out. Some of it falls on the hardened path, and the birds come and quickly eat it away. It really doesn't do anything. It never really germinates at all. It's interesting, though, that the second soil type is rocky soil. And so because it has so much rock in it, early in the spring, with the right amount of moisture, it would heat that soil up even faster. And sure enough, it would sprout and grow. It would start doing better than any of the other ground, even though it has a lot of rocks in it. The only problem comes in later on when the rocks continue to drive the heat down into the soil, and now it dries the soil out and it can't do very good. It won't produce a crop. Jesus said this. He said, there's some of the seed that falls in the rocky ground, rocky hearts, you might say. And when it lands on that rocky heart, it springs up. It says it's received with joy. So in other words, the message, the seed, the word is received with joy. But then it says, but then problems come along. Problems and persecution because of the word of God. Those things begin to happen and begin to fall away. They begin to, you might say, abandon the faith. It doesn't really grow anymore. It dies out. It was received with joy, but it dies out. The next type of soil was that the good seed falls among the thorns. I mean, you just out scattering seed, and some of it could land along, the paths and where there were thorns, and it has to compete with that. And it's that competing with it that begins to drive it down so it can grow, but it can't ever produce any fruit. And Jesus says, the problems of this life, the persecutions, the worries and the lure of wealth that focus our attention away are like those thorns. And I can't help but think that maybe these bridesmaids are represented here, you might say, within the 4 soil types. That there were problems that had arisen and they didn't bring enough oil. That there were worries of life or the lure of wealth, or I didn't have ove money because I spent it on this and I did this, and somehow they're not able to produce fruit. But whatever the reason here, they have been crowded out. It's all of these things that are taken away. And the 5 that are wise have enough, but the foolish ones do not. Goes on to say, when in the next verse, when the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. Notice again here the word all. They're all there. It's taken a lot longer than what they anticipated. They never would have thought that this would happen that long. And so they probably had their lamps. They had lit them. They were ready. After a while, they thought, well, their lamps are still burning. They sat back down, and pretty soon they began to lay down, and they were sleeping. And it says at midnight, they were roused by the shout, "Look, look, the bridegroom is coming. Come out to meet him. Look, do you see him? He's coming now." Well, of course, they're in a deep sleep. They wake up, and they're going to grab their lamp, and we didn't know it would be so long, and now they got to try to get their wits about them and what's happening. By the way, you still have time. You still have time. If that first waffle didn't turn out right, you can get another one, or a bagel, or some chips, or whatever. This is still going for a while. We've got time. So here in this moment, it says, he's been taking all this time, this unusually long delay, all have fallen asleep. It's also an unexpected time of arrival. Both of those things are there. Now the word here, this unexpected arrival time, and this idea of a shout is where we get the word like crisis from. Crisis. And so like, what do you do in the midst of a crisis? You're scrambling. In other words, they're asleep. Wake up. Look, he's coming. Someone had spotted him. Maybe it was in the bridegroom's entourage, and he's making his way there. Someone who's shouting, he's coming. And of course, we know who the bridegroom is. The bridegroom always represented in Scripture as Jesus. He's coming. He's coming. Get ready. Come out. Meet him. Let's start the wedding. I remember back to 1988, and the only reason I can remember this is because of the title of a book. In our church in Ohio, when I was there on staff, we had a Bible and bookstore owner that was attended our congregation, he and his family. And they had received a book, and they were selling a book called The 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Going to Come Back in 1988. And I remember thinking, as someone who was young and out of seminary and just in the ministry a little bit, how odd that was that this book was gaining popularity. In fact, the author of it, Edgar Whisenant, he mailed out 300,000 copies to pastors all across the United States. Well, it turned out to be a good idea, because he would then go on to sell 4.5 million copies. Now, he was convinced, now here's the thing you got to know about Edgar, was that he was a NASA engineer. So everybody was like, wow, he's obviously very smart, and he was also a student of the Bible. And he had figured out, by looking at the scriptures, that Jesus was going to come back, catch these dates, between September 11th, 9/11. So the first time we were scared on 9/11 was 1988. Between September 11th and September 13th of 1988, 88, Jesus was going to come back. 4.5 million books sold in the United States. Now, in one of my Bible classes on a Wednesday night when I was teaching, they were there, they asked about this, they showed the book, and I said, well, that's really not what Jesus says. He says, no one will know. In fact, he says, I don't even know. He says, that's up to the Father. And he did say, I am coming back, but you won't know the time or the date. But this guy somehow had figured that out, that it was going to be September 11th. Now, I'm going to admit to you that on September 10th, I probably had a little extra time in prayer, But honestly, I didn't think that would happen. Of course, nothing did happen. Jesus did not come back. Edgar would go on to write several more books, all of them dwindling sales, until I think his last one, when he published, very few people read it at all. And Jesus is trying to tell us here that this moment when he comes back into our world, this arrival of Jesus, which he's been trying to tell us in Matthew 24 and 25, this is going to happen. It's really what we, again, built the message on last week. This is going to happen, and you need to be ready for this when it happens. You need to be prepared. But you won't know exactly when it is. You won't know that. You won't know. It's like, again, it's like telling your kids, hey, listen, let's get ready to go on vacation. When are we going? We don't know. We don't know. But it's going to happen. Listen, as it continues, all the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Again, all the bridesmaids are there. The 5 foolish and the 5 wise. They're all there. They're all preparing their situation. They're getting ready for that. All of them are ready. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, hey, please give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out. I mean, we need something. I mean, obviously, we didn't think it was going to take this long, and we didn't think about having extra oil. You obviously did, but we didn't. Then it goes on to say, please give us some of that oil. And then he says, but the others replied, we don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves. At first reading, that might seem a little harsh. We don't have enough for all of us. Well, can you just share what you have? Well, no, because if we do, there's no way we're going to be able to do our job. We're not going to be able to light the way. We can't do it. So quickly go as fast as you can and find some shop somewhere. It was plentiful to find an olive oil shop. You could get that. And then go. Now at midnight, I don't know, but apparently you could maybe knock loudly on the door and maybe somebody would get up and give you the oil. But go get some oil. Go get it and buy some for yourselves. It's interesting here because being prepared for when Jesus returns, you might say being prepared for eternity, is not transferable. It's not. My mom's faith is not what will get me into heaven. And I could stand up before the gates and say, well, listen, Jesus, I know my mom loved you. My mom painted this beautiful painting of Jesus holding the sheep. It's a beautiful painting. My mom read me those Bible stories before I went to bed at night. My mom. My wife gets up and has devotions. My wife goes to church on Sunday. My wife does these things. My wife shares. My wife will pray. I see my wife pray from time to time in our home. The home I provide, by the way. The Bibles that she bought, all those things that she goes to the church, and she gives some of my money, mine. I mean, I'm the one with the greater income. She gives that, Jesus. My wife. Perhaps even in some situations, could be a child that finds Christ. Well, our son loves you, Jesus. I mean, he's considering the ministry. Doesn't that count in some aspect? Does that not count? I mean, he's our offspring? No. it's not transferable. It's not. This is the most difficult part of this parable that Jesus is trying to tell us, that this is what the kingdom is going to be like when I come back. He's trying to say, no. A lot of people are, they want it, they've got the invitation, they're like excited about the invitation. Yeah, I'll be there, love weddings, let's go. But they're not prepared. Can you give us some oil, please? Please. There's no way that we're going to have enough. If you don't share, we won't have enough. But we can't share. We can't give that to you. Being prepared. I remember a couple of times in my life when I went snowmobiling with a good friend. And on one occasion, it was really cold. Well, both occasions were really cold. One was a blizzard, the other day was clear. But we got stuck out on the snow on this dirt road. It was massive drifts, and it was so cold. And we worked hard to get my sled free, and that was Dan. His name was Dan Murphy. Great guy. Another time, my sled had broken through the ice and had gone and just not too deep, but had submerged itself in the water. It was below zero that day. And I had to go into the water, in that freezing cold water, and pull that sled up out of there so that we could tow it up on the ground and then get it restarted. I was freezing. Dan said, John, sit down. Take off your socks, your shoes, take all of that off. And he reached into his kit. He had a kit. And he pulled out these little hand warmers. And he put those all inside my boot, put that back on. The gloves, everything. He helped me, got everything started. I always wondered, and I'm going to be honest with you, I thought Dan was always so prepared that I just marveled at that. And it was a reminder to me that, John, you need to be prepared. And Dan was always prepared. He was always prepared for what possibly could happen. And I was the kind of person, let's just go. I want to go snowmobiling. But I'm so thankful I had Dan on every time I was on those rides, because he knew what to do. He was prepared. And he transferred that to me. But the Bible says you can't transfer that. A mom can't transfer it to her children, although she shares her faith with it, but we all have to stand on our own. We all do. And then it goes on to say here, but while they were gone to buy oil, so the 5 that are foolish, they don't have enough oil, but they go out and they buy oil. They've gone out to buy the oil. They've left. Then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, that place where we're going to have this incredible meal. It's going to be phenomenal. We're going to be in there, and the door was locked. The door was locked. Interesting, isn't it, that the door is locked? Continues down in verse 11. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, Lord, Lord. Twice they say, in other words, they say, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. But he, the bridegroom, he calls back, believe me, I don't know you. And the door's not opened. And our heart breaks because we're like, wait a minute. They went out and they got more oil, and then they came back. Should not the door open? Jesus, can you change the story just a little bit? And everything within us, I'm just like you. Everything within us wants to change the story. We don't want it to end like this. We want to say, well, okay, listen, now I hope you learned a lesson here. You need to be ready, because you don't know when the wedding's going to take place. You need to be ready. We learned that lesson. And the door was opened, and they all went in and had a great time. But that's not what it says. as much as you and I may want to change the writing, it doesn't say that. He says, I don't know you. I don't know you. He says, so in verse 13 then, he says, so you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return. You must keep watch. You don't know the day or the hour of when Jesus will come back. None of us do. It's like having your bags packed, by faith. Your faith is packed. It's kind of like everywhere that I've gone and had been blessed to be able to go as within missions work around the world. In every place where I was going, quite honestly, I didn't know anything about the place where I was going to go. I didn't know anything. But once the trip was set, I began to learn a lot of things about it. Like, for instance, where am I flying in? How will we hook up with the team that's going to lead us around? There's a lot of correspondence that went on. And then some research. What will the weather be like when we're there at that time of the year? What's the weather like? What do we need to pack? In some places where I've gone into several different countries on a trip, and I've been gone for several weeks in Europe, in other words, where am I going to be? Where am I speaking? What's going to be happening? You had to be prepared. You had to be ready. See, that's the real question about this parable. What does it mean to be ready for when Christ comes back? And the best thing that I can say to you is that it means that we have this active and alive relationship with Jesus. That we're not just going through motions. And I understand that sometimes we can all kind of go through the motions of Christianity. We're kind of in, well, this is what we do on Sunday and this is what we do.